Hi everyone, and welcome to the tutorials for the Harrisonburg Quilt Sew Along, hosted by Pat Sloan at her website ilovetomakequilts.com. This quilt was designed by Pat and her friend Wendy Sheppard to help raise funds for the Virginia Quilt Museum. Hopefully you've jumped over and grabbed your pattern or even your kit. There were a few available in Pat's sleepover fabric. Come back here and I'll show you how to do it. Throughout this video, I'll be showing you how I chain piece all 5 blocks from the one of the 6 colorways that we need for the controlled scrappy version. So as you can see on the table in front of me here, I have all of the pieces cut out to make those 5 blocks of the one colorway. Here I've got my pieces for the center economy block. These pieces are for later on the sides. The little squares there are for our sashing blocks, which will be in a later video. And what I'm indicating to you here is I'm going to do the half square triangles, because we need a total of 60, a mixture of 8 at a time and 2 at a time. So there'll be 7 lots made 8 at a time and 2 lots made 2 at a time to get that total of 60 that we need for all 5 of our blocks. We're going to start today in the same order as listed in the pattern by doing our center economy blocks. So we begin by taking the piece of fabric that we've chosen as our center square, and what you see me doing here is folding it to find the center, and I will do the same with the 4 background triangles that are the first round to be sewn onto this economy block. Finding the center in this instance isn't 100% necessary, as there is enough fabric in the cutting requirements to actually trim this down. But if you are making economy blocks in the future from another pattern, that can't be guaranteed, so it's a good practice to line up on the centers. We are working with a bias edge on our background triangles as we have cut them in half, so the best way to attack that is to put the bias on the bottom when you're sewing, so the bias goes towards the feed dogs, and we sew on the solid piece of fabric on the top, and that way we can reduce the amount of stretch that may occur. So I'm going to pin the triangles on 2 opposing sides of our center block in this instance, and sew all of those on with a 1/4 inch seam, and then I will meet you back at the cutting board for the next steps. With those 2 side triangles now sewn on, we just need to press our triangles out away from the center or open, it's up to you. Just pressing to one side is my preference. And then we'll trim off the little overhangs before attaching our other 2 triangles. Trimming away the excess isn't really a necessary step, but for me, I use a 1/4 inch foot with a little guide on it for those times when I'm not paying attention. You can do the fold and find the center on this one, but it's not really necessary, as you'll find once we've got these trimmed back that we have exactly 1/4 of an inch, so you can eyeball placing it in the center. And as I said previously, we do have enough fabric to trim these down once they're done. So let's get these trimmed down, attach our last 2 triangles, and I'll meet you back at the cutting board to show you how we square this up. time to give this a quick press before we square it up to the required measurement. When coming to trim down these center economy block units on this first round, you can see me switching the ruler around and moving it hither and thither, and that's because there is a very unique measurement that we need to trim this down to. It is listed in the pattern. What I finally decide to go with is making sure I have 1/4 of an inch on 2 of my points here and trying to make sure that I have a straight line down the center of the block. Then I trim those 2 sides away at that 1/4 of an inch, and then I rotate the block and I put our measurement on the 2 cut edges and cut the final 2 sides. The points will meet up on the center economy block, even though it is a weird little measurement. You may miss 1 or 2 of the points, but don't worry yourself too much about that. It looks fine in the end. As you can see from my footage, it did take me a while to commit to the method that I was going to use to trim these down. We do need to trim all 5 blocks in the method I mentioned before, and I'll be popping a link in the top right hand corner of your screen to a downloadable foundation paper piecing pattern for this center economy block that is on the Pattern Creators website. Hopefully you've also watched Pat's video for today for some extra tips. We now need to repeat that process for our next colour to create our actual center economy block. You can see me here folding my piece in half, and I'm going to line that up with the peak of my square. It's not really necessary, as once again there is enough fabric here for a trim down at the end, but if we have it nice and simple here, we'll remember for future patterns that may not have that extra allowance added in to do this step. We'll notice that I am once again putting the bias on the bottom, as this is the most accurate way to construct these blocks. care needs to be taken once again with this second trim down, and you'll see from my fast motion here that I did what was most logical in my brain, which was go 1/4 of an inch from each of the points. This resulted in a block that was 1/4 of an inch smaller than the required measurement. So what I suggest you do is find the center of the block, in this case that is 4 1/4 inches, and cut one side, and then work your way around all 4 sides going from that point. Your points in this instance will float 1/8 of an inch away once we put the sashing pieces on, but that won't be noticeable either in the final quilt. Do not overthink this step and do not stress yourself too much. Once again, I have that link in the top right hand corner to the foundation paper square for this center economy block, but doing it this way is just as easy. Later on in this process, you'll see that I grab my 8.5 inch ruler, and that makes this process so much easier for me. Just showing you quickly here that the first one I did was wrong, as it was way too close at the perfect 1/4 of an inch. So you're just outside that 1/4 of an inch and your blocks will be fine. Let's move on to the half square triangles. As I said at the beginning, I am going to do 7 lots of 8 at a time half square triangles and 2 lots of 2 at a time half square triangles to get the required number of 60 that I need for this set of colors doing the controlled scrappy version. So to do the 2 at a time method, as always, we draw a diagonal line from corner to corner on the rear of one piece of our fabric. We put these fabrics right side together and sew a 1/4 of an inch on each side of this drawn line. To do the 8 at a time method, we drew a diagonal line in 2 directions on our square, and in this instance I have my square cut at 6 inches. With those 2 diagonal lines, we do the same as the 2 at a time, and we sew a 1/4 of an inch on each side of both of the drawn lines. Let's do that, and I'll see you back at the cutting mat for the next steps. Now that we have all the required stitching done, I am just going to give these pieces a press first to relax those stitches and set the seams before slicing them apart. As you can see, they were a little bit puckered, and that's because of the tension and the feed dogs and everything, but after a quick press and all of those threads relax down, we can move to the next step. With the 2 at a time method, we just simply need to cut these in half on our drawn line before moving towards pressing those pieces out and doing a final trim down. With the 8 at a time method, however, we need to slice the block in half, both horizontally and vertically first, and then we can slice it apart on our drawn lines before pressing to the darker of the 2 fabrics and moving to the trim down process. As you may or may not have noticed, I'm moving ahead just with 12 half square triangles using the 1 8 at a time and the 2 at a time. I'll do all the rest later, and you can see the pieces waiting for me up there in the top left hand corner. I prefer to trim my half square triangles 2 at a time, and I just use a standard square, in this case a 6.5 inch ruler. I nest up my seam allowances nice and tightly there before placing the diagonal line from the ruler on the stitching line. I then make sure that I have enough fabric on both of my pieces to sit outside my required trim down measurement before trimming the first 2 sides. I then rotate the block and the ruler, and I line up the required trim down sides on the freshly trimmed sides and trim the final 2 sides. I'll do this with all 12, and then we can start building our sashing. As you can see here, I have the sashing units laid out as per the pattern. The ones at the top are for the left and right hand sides, and the ones underneath are for the top and the bottom rows. We need to sew all of these half square triangles together, being sure that we're keeping the right orientation for a left and a right hand side. As you can see, I've made a stack of everything that I can sew at the same time, and we're going to the machine to do all of that now. With all of those units sewn, I'm just going to clip these all apart and take the left and the right hand sides, give it a quick finger press before placing the other piece on the opposite side. With our left and right hand sashing now sewn together, we are just going to press that, and we're going to press towards the center of this, which is the most solid piece of fabric. We're then going to move on to our top and bottom sashing points, and I'm going to begin by giving a little snip in the middle of our seam so that I can press the bulk of our half square triangles in the opposite directions to ensure that we have the flattest block possible. So you can see me doing that here on this one. Just give it a small snip down to but not through the stitching, and we'll be able to flip those sides in opposite directions so that the bulk of our half square triangles will lay as flat as possible. You'll see me now here maneuver those seam allowances into the direction that I want them to go, which is opposing, so that the points of our half square triangles point in the direction they naturally want to go. We'll then just give that a press on the top, ensuring not to actually iron, but pressing down and holding so that we don't stretch any of our bias there. And if you do this to all of these pieces, we can then sew them on with a 1/4 inch on both sides of our remaining sashing center rectangles before moving on to final block construction. We'll press these side sashing pieces now towards the center rectangle as well, as we did for the other pieces. We just need to attach our 2 side sashing pieces now, so we'll just line that up and place a pin on each opposing corner and sew both of those on. With both of those sewn on now, I am going to do a little bit of snipping in my seams to control the bulk of where the tip of our economy block comes into this one. We're just going to put a little snip on either side of that peak, so that when we can press the outside sections down towards the center, and that peak from our square in a square or economy block will press out towards the sides, and this will control the bulk and give us a nice flat block. It's now time to attach the top and the bottom sashing units, and you'll see here that with our pressing, if you followed my directions, we have a nested seam on this side and the opposing side. So I'm just going to pop a pin there and on each corner and sew both of these units on. With those top and bottom sashing units now sewn on, we are going to get ready to spin the intersections at the first and the last, as I'll indicate now. To do this, we use our seam ripper or give it just a little twist to pull out the stitches that are above our straight stitching line on both sides. We then will give that a slight twist and we'll be able to put all of our seam allowances going in the one direction, either clockwise or counterclockwise. I'll show you once this is pressed what it looks like, and you'll do this on all of your blocks to have nice flat intersections. Folks, thanks for joining me week after week for these block tutorials. If you haven't done so already, please consider liking my video, sharing it with a friend, hitting that little subscribe button, but most importantly, clicking the little bell icon so you'll be notified of all my future updates. As always, thanks for watching and bye for now.